Uncertainty, Protest. That is the panel. My name is Farah Hanifa. I'm head of the Department of Sociology, and I'm very happy to be here. So the first session is by Angela Kishore of Jawaharlal Nehru University in India. Welcome, we're very pleased to have you. And the title of the presentation is Populism, Protest and Mass Mobilization, the Indian Narrative. So you have 20 minutes and you will be reminded of your times by our timekeeper, and you're free to take over now. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. A very good afternoon to everyone. I'm Angela Kishore, PhD research scholar from Jawaharlal Nehru University. I will be discussing my paper titled Populism, Protest and Mass Mobilization, the Indian Narrative. Before discussing my paper, I would like to begin with the famous quote of Franz Kafka: "The right understanding of any matter and a misunderstanding of the same matter do not wholly exclude each other." Kafka in this quote explains that it is possible to understand a matter from one point of view while still missing the true meaning of the matter because of the perspective from which the matter is viewed. It is similar in the case of populism. As a notion, it is in the paradoxical situation. Beginning with my introduction, the 21st century began with the phase of achieving and establishing a democratic structure in those countries that were still a long way from democracy, whether it was an attempt by the United States to demonstrate democracy in Afghanistan or the unfinished agenda of the Arab Spring to overthrow the rule of autocracy, corruption, and economic stagnation. And the battle of the people against authoritarian state, such as the iconic image captured by the capture of the tank man protesting in front of the army against China's authoritarian government in Tiananmen Square. Though the prevalence of the political paralysis is a common flaw in democracy, even well-established democracy cannot avoid this predicament. Protests, demonstrations, and marches are manifestations of the people's collective awareness and are known as non-institutionalized collective action. The dictionary definition of these phrases may differ, but the legitimacy of these outrages infers legality. Being a thin-centered ideology, populism existence as an ideology lies upon the other thick thesis. India, a diversified country in every way, is already a well-established democracy. Nonetheless, we can notice a surge in popular protests when a government attempts to impose measures that are contrary to democratic principles. The country is thrown into disarray. As Argentina philosopher Ernest Laclau explains, the element of political efficacy exists in the structure of the institution of governance. Therefore, the emergence of populist movement or populist politics is possible in a system where the breakdown of social, political, and economic system is possible. Before delving into the rise of populism as a block to discover, it is necessary to dig into the available literature on the literature available on this concept. Populism is a contested notion, and several attempts to define and redefine it with the correct definition frequently provoke controversies among social scientists. Just like in the case of democracy, even when there is a consensus on the operationalization in the literature, because of the extensive classification of its content, populism is frequently regarded as an amorphous phenomenon. The term is generally associated with movement, regimes, leaders, ideologies, policies, modes of incorporation, or forms of integration and state structures. Social scientists have distributed thought and challenged numerous specifications, but the component of this constructive idea has varied the coordinates of this topic. Ernest Laclau propounded his theory of populism in a very abstract way. He argued that populism is an emancipatory social force through which a marginalized section challenges the dominant power structure. Moreover, it is about the popular engagement of the people from the particular section in decision-making power. And the vantage point of this political scenario lies its root in the historical condition of the people from that specific group. Henceforth, populism believes that the people should have an increasing influence on decision to achieve the highest possible degree of conformity between the rulers and those ruled. Also, there are other features of populism, such as scholars categorize populism between left and right populists to demonstrate that right populists are more dangerous than the left populists. Other attempts to identify populists' particular profile of substantive commitments, which includes a dependency on majoritarianism. Others are seen as opportunist populists as they build up their narrative through democratic rhetoric. This means to disarm their opponents by pretending to be more liberal than liberals. Some interpret populism as a reference to the politics of redemption. Lackler observed that the highest form of populism is socialism and was among the first one who emphasized the antagonistic divide. Similarly, scholars like Murray explained populism as an ideology consisting of two homogeneous groups with the antagonistic relationship between the people and the established elite. The will of the people is considered the ultimate source of legitimacy, whereas the scholars like Canavan asserts that populism is beyond the simple political discontent and frustration. It's hope. It's a politics of hope, and label it as a politics of redemption. In this paper, I will concentrate on the emergence of populism in India, a liberal democratic country. Most of the protests and movement that occurred in the last decade are prime illustration of a clash between the government and the demonstrators. The creation of the two antagonistic groups are evident, though backed by numerous researchers as they advocated the so-called populist thesis. This approach of the study is both descriptive and analytical in character. The data was acquired from a variety of books, magazine, newspaper, research, publication, and websites. Individual demonstrations individual demonstration against injustice and cruelty have occurred throughout the history. Anger and outrages have a crucial role in a democracy. It manifests expression in the form of indignant letters to the editor, furious social media posts, legal action, and police reports, as well as protests and marches ranging from the peaceful vigils to riots and killings. Demonstrations have emerged along the process of being a growing country, as the soil of this country is a face of an unjust society with crime, pervasive poverty, and slow-moving legal system, exposing some of the volatile reasons. Because the existence of such political, social, and economic parasites sets the stage of grievance redressals, an approach of legitimizing demand, a function of multicultural democracy, becomes a means of free speech and expression. According to the latest report released by the VDAM, Variety of Democracy Institute at Sweden's University of Gothenburg, the study's title was Democracy Report 2022, Autocracy Changing Nature. Based on the score in the Liberal Democratic Index, nations got classified into four regime types: liberal democracy, electoral autocracy, and closed autocracy. It assessed India as an electoral autocracy, rating it 93rd out of the now 197 nations on the LDI platform. At the most fundamental level, Hogstrom argues that if democracy have a low level of legitimacy and low effectiveness, they can be classified as weak. As this analysis indicates, that Indian democracy is becoming a part of a global trend in which an anti-pluralistic political party promotes a country's autocracy. The narrative established by the Indian government was gearing up all the forms of populist movements to emerge. Protests, virtual protests, and or demonstration are more than simply a passing fad. They have a deeper significance. In the Indian context, mass protests have witnessed mass resistance. Clashes between police and demonstrators are not unusual in pluralistic society like India. When legal and state system fail, people frequently take to the streets to deliver some of the vigilant justice and retaliation. Protests have been ranged from outrage at violation of free speech and expression. For example, the murder of the journalist Lankesh and Bhaumik, to criticism of increasing Islamophobia and lynching of Dalits and Muslims. Hashtag not in my name. Demonstrations have been held on issues such as farmer fatalities and droughts, women's safety, and most notably the Nirbhaya protests, which resulted in the criminal law reform and the miscarriages of justice. There have been several demonstrations in India. The timeline of the collective opposition against the state and its decisive, violent, and new liberal agenda marks a watershed moment in Indian politics. The demonstration have shown how collective and organized opposition can become symbols of solidarity and intersectional dissent. In fact, India has a long history of stunning protest and demonstration. This could be traced back to independence movement when individuals began to develop a sense of belonging to the nation state. These have varied from the bloody upheaval of 1857 to Gandhian satyagrahas across the country. Subsequently, India has evolved its innovative and strategic protest technique that, in addition to garnering attention, it has symbolic significance. For instance, women hugging the trees to assert their deeper bond and dependence on forests during the Chipko movement, or Dalits dumping cow carcasses in public places to reject hierarchical and violent caste-based work imposed on them. The recent decade in Indian politics has been one of the most challenging in respect to smooth politics, beginning with the anti-corruption movement in 2011. The action resulted in the departure of Agriculture Minister from the panel of ministers tasked with assessing the drought Jan Lokpal bill. In the Nirbhaya movement of 2012, the central government and other states announced several measures to safeguard women's safety. With the shift in the administration came an upsurge in demonstration as the government pushed the populace towards the masculine Hindutva doctrine. Protests have become so entrenched that even Prime Minister Modi cannot escape them. Modi recently referred to the demonstrators as Andolan GV, protesters for protesting. However, in the 1970s and 80s, he himself was demonstrating against the Congress regime. As Call asserts that the Modi tenure has been disastrous for minorities, environmentalists, labor rights activists, liberal media, progressive universities, social and economically vulnerable groups such as Dalit and farmers. Throughout the Modi's administration, we can see a tremendous resistance and upending protests in Kashmir, anti-rape and anti-CAA, that is Citizenship Amendment Act protests, and the farmers' protests in India. As Chakrabarti asserts, that protests have the ability to energize a receptive populace by bringing them together in harmony, shot with the force of solidarity that comes through the collective political action. Populism, protest and populist culture, whether it is an anti-citizenship amendment act or the farmers' protest, both these protests were the answers to the present regime. Between December 2019 and November 2021, the Indian streets erupted in protest, agitation, blockades, and conflict. Protests gathered to oppose the contentious and discriminated Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019, which grants India citizenship to persecuted religious minorities from neighboring Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. Only Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Parsis, Jain, and Christians are eligible under this provision. The CAA expressly excludes Muslims. The act got heavily criticized since it explicitly makes religious identity a condition for Indian citizenship. The central government curtailed civil rights, shut down the internet as protest site, censored news in the media, and arrested political opponents, students, dissenters, protesters in the name of restoring order and managing the COVID-19 crisis. With the usual justification of weaving out anti-national who agree arguably the biggest protest the biggest protest the world has ever seen. Farmers have been battling against the enactment of the three farm laws that the government introduced in parliament and rushed to the base on status. The three controversial farm laws hurriedly passed without proper debate in the parliament were the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce, Promotion and Felicitation Act 2020, Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance, and Farmers Service Act 2020, and Essential Commodities Amendment Act 2020. According to McGuinn, to analyze the role of populist culture, it becomes vital to examine the role of public communication, institutional power, and from a materialistic perspective, socio-economic relation. The process of socialization got strengthened due to the essential communication discourse is recognized as a collective action frame. Populist culture will now be more or less enhanced democracy towards a more democratic structure of society. Farmers' protest was fascinating for several reasons, as they have been supported by trade unions from various sectors, including service and manufacturing. The protests and the blockades have spread to different states. Simultaneously, sit-ins and marches organized across the state borders. Several state governments have tactically extended their support to the protesters. They have received the widespread support. Coming to the conclusion, India gained its independence in the mid of the 20th century and is now celebrating its 75th anniversary. When the British left India, they left behind a broken, needy, underdeveloped, and economically unstable country. There is no question that the large protests have shaken the country's foundation and encouraged ordinary people from all walks of life to provide support to the cause. What's striking is that the present farmers demonstration not only wants a protectionist state that resists privatization, but democratize it. This part of the demonstration is critical as the welfare state slowly crumbles, while simultaneously observing the scary emergence of a police state that uses force, surveillance, and other techniques to control, to resist and oppress. As this research study is inclined towards the work of Ernest Laclau, one takes hope from the fact that the movement and the mass mobilization seems to be going from strength to strength, as it depends upon the vulnerability of the subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela.
Thank you.
We will have all of the presentations and then open for questions. The
Okay.
next presentation is by AMRSK Abe Singha from Waseda University, Japan. And the title of the presentation is Fighting Contemporary Uncertainties, the International Involvement. NGOs, INGOs, and development organizations during the post-war peace-building process in Sri Lanka. You can make your presentation now.
Yeah, hello, good evening, ma'am. Is there any possibility for me to share my screen?
Yes, you can. Just 1 second.
Okay.
All participants. Try now, please.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, can you see my presentation now, PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Should I start now? Okay, hello.
Yes, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Rashika, and I'm also from Sri Lanka, and currently I'm conducting my PhD in the Waseda University, Japan. So the title of my today presentation is Fighting Contemporary Uncertainties, the International Involvement, NGO, INGO, and Development Organizations during the post-war peace-building process in Sri Lanka. So in case of the introduction, actually, as we all know, there is very historical and very long the discussion about the beginning and the end and the current situation in the Sri Lankan conflict. So I thought in case of the introduction part, it's better to highlight several milestone in this in the process of peace building and also the conflict. So as Galton mentioned, conflict plays a crucial role in our lives. Conflicts interlink with our demands that we need to fulfill. If not, the failed emotions can be released through various forms of violence, such as physical, verbal, or both. As we all know, Sri Lanka is a multicultural, multi-religious state. So Sinhala, Buddhist, Hindus, Muslims, and everyone live here very peacefully, and there was also a conflict. And the close reason for the beginning of the struggle actually interlinked with the colonial period, and also in case of the introduction of the 1956 Sinhala Only Language Act. And in 1972, there was a new provision for the Sinhala Only Language Act, which required the proficiency of Sinhala language for the university entrance and also for the government job quotas. That led the blast of the conflict, and that also inspired Tamil youth to take the guns to their hands and go for a conflict. And the struggle continued around 30 years. and from 1976 till 2009. And from 2009 till today, we are having the era of the post-war peace building. So in my presentation, actually, from now, I'm going to talk with you how and how those international organizations engage in the post-war peace building process in Sri Lanka. This is the content of my today presentation. And actually, in case of my research, there are three research questions. The primary research question of my research is, do those national, international, and development organizations practically address the grassroots level and all the types of ethnic groups in the process of peace building and the development in Sri Lanka? And my second research question is, how do the national, international, and development organizations involved on the post-war peace building process in Sri Lanka? And the third research question is, what are the major challenges national, international, and development organizations face in the process of post-war peace building in Sri Lanka? So in the literature review, actually this research mainly inspired by 4 key theoretical foundations, which can be recognized as negative peace, positive peace, liberal peace building, and hybrid peace approach. As Johan Galtung mentioned, the negative peace means the absence of war or direct or physical violations. Positive peace means the absence of indirect or structural violations. In case of the positive actually peace, in order, Galtung had mentioned, in order to achieve the positive peace, it's really important to recognize the cause root of the conflicts and also understand the demands of the requirements and everything which already interlinked with the conflicts there. And the liberal peace building approach can be recognized as the mostly applied peace building mechanism for the many post-war conflict related countries. Liberal peace building can be identified as the promotion of democracy, market-based economies, reforms, and range of other institutions associated with modern states as driving force for building peace. And mainly in the liberal peace building, there was an effort to introduce the democratization and also the market economies for those conflict affected countries, and also trying to achieve peace through these mechanisms. The hybrid peace approach is a state of affairs in which liberal and illiberal norms, institutions, and actors coexist. In case of the methodology of my research, actually this research mainly targets to overall 10 organizations divided as 2 international non-governmental organizations, 3 development organizations, and 5 national non-governmental organizations, which mainly activate in Sri Lanka with the purpose of the post-war peace building in Sri Lanka. So those selected non-governmental organizations are AFRIL, Social Architect, National Peace Council, Center for Policy Alternatives, Center for Peace Building and Reconciliation, and in INGOSA, Search for Common Grounds, and International Media Support. And the development organizations are USAID, GIZ, and FLEET. I also use both primary and secondary data sources for the analysis of the data. And in case of the primary data source, I was able to, actually I did this research in the COVID era. So it was quite difficult for me to go to the field, but I was able to contact 15 representatives from these 10 organizations and conduct interviews and questionnaire with them. And also I referred their websites and also the articles and also books and all the reading materials which already interlink with the programming and all the activation model and structures of those organizations. So let's go for the data analysis part. As I mentioned before, I'm having 3 research questions, and my primary research question is, do those national, international, and development organizations practically address the grassroots level and all the types of ethnic groups in the process of peace building and development in Sri Lanka? So in order to recognize organizational approach on grassroots level and ethnic group representation, I prepared a framework through the 25 administrative districts in Sri Lanka, prioritizing direct conflict affected areas and indirect conflict affected areas. So from this chart, you can see what are the direct and indirect conflict affected areas. So the direct conflict affected areas can be identified as Jaffna, Kilinochchi, Mana, Mullaitivu, Puttalam, Trincomalee, Batticaloa, Ampara, and Vavuniya, and rest of all can be actually classified as indirect conflict affected areas. So when I analyze the overall activation of those 10 organizations, I recognize that the Ampara, which was a multicultural district, was the mostly attracted district of of all organization, and already 8 organizations are conducting their post-war peace building related programs in Ampara. And secondly, Jaffna, Kilinochchi, Hatton, Batticaloa, Nuwara district are the most targeted districts. And and also the very interesting part was many of these districts are having the majority Tamil population. And and also I realized that the organizations are mainly conducting their research, mainly targeting Tamil governed and also multicultural, multi-ethnic district from overall district classification. And when you talk about the target group analysis and evaluation, in case of the all organizations, they are mainly prioritizing grassroots youth, which was the 31% from overall target group evaluation, while the women population had recognized as the second most attracted target group from the all organization. It was 11%. And then the civil society organizations as the third mostly targeted group. My second research question was, how do the national, international, and development organizations involved on the post-war peace building process in Sri Lanka? So I also use through mechanism to evaluate this. First one was their focus areas, and the second one was what are the approaches they applied to obtain post-war peace building there. So the mostly used focus area was conflict transformation, and secondly most applied focus area was democracy and human rights, transitional justice, social cohesion and reconciliation. And thirdly, mainly the organization used right to information, constitutional reforms, and peace building. And when I talk about the approaches, actually, majority organizations are using seminars, conferences, and workshops to conduct their post-war peace building related programs. And also, secondly, they are applying dialogue, media, training, awareness programs in the process of post-war peace building. My third research question was, what are the major challenges national, international, and development organizations face in the process of post-war peace building in Sri Lanka? So I identified 7 key challenges there. First one was the lack of community participation, as the organization still did not able to win the trust among the multicultural communities in the state. Actually, many of the representatives highlight this as the mostly challenged problem that they are facing in the fields, because people are not trusting the organizations, and they are very afraid to give the details and even share their problems, and also trust the organizations and engage with the programs, and also trust the others and neighbors whom also belong to the different ethnic groups. The second one was, as we actually many of might know, as the negative influences of the Sri Lankan political party-based political culture, because Sri Lanka is having a ethnicity and religion-based, sometimes religion-based political party system. So to me, I feel like these negative influences also arose with those political party-based system and the culture, where people divided as ethnicity and religion, and through those divided groups, they are asking their rights and challenging each other and comparing themselves with the others. And to me, I feel that can be also a major reason for this damage of trust among different ethnic groups in Sri Lanka. The third one was the lengthy policies and legal frameworks in Sri Lankan administrative framework. So mainly NGO Secretariat and its administrative policies. Because in case of the legal framework, the organization and also their representatives highlighted that in case of even from the receive money from their donors and also taking permission from the authorities to conduct the programs, they are having number of difficulties with this lengthy process of the Sri Lankan administrative structure, because from the divisional level, from the national level, they have to go to step by step and they have to take the support. And one also highlighted me that within 3 months they have to complete the program, but it took around 4 or 5 months them to take the permission from the authority from bottom to top, and then they cannot manage their fundings and even go to field and work. The situation was like that. And also the other one was the current, I did this research in the era of actually Rajapaksa regime. So then the situation was the Sri Lankan governmental pro-military tendency. So also the representatives highlighted that scenario. And also the absence of practical and empirical mission towards the post-war peace building of the state in both governmental and organizational side. So the sixth recognized challenge was the organization still do not able to have positive contribution from the Tamil diaspora community to succeed their mission towards the post-war peace building process. Because actually as I understood, in the era of conflict, the Tamil diaspora played a very crucial role in the fundings and communication and international pressure and the good and weapon exporting and all the things. So actually, if there is a mechanism to apply their support even in the post-war peace building effort, I think there could be a very visible challenge there could be a very visible change in the process of post-war peace building in Sri Lanka. And the seventh challenge was the negative impacts committed by the media. So especially this is about the social media actually, especially about the hate speeches and about the jokes and the criticism towards the cultural identifications was also highlighted as the challenges for the post-war peace building in Sri Lanka. And yeah, in the conclusion, actually, I realized that organizations are prioritizing grassroots level in their mission towards the post-war peace building effort in Sri Lanka, but it's equally important to cover up all the ethnic groups without prioritizing Tamil and Muslims in the conflict affected areas. And also it's very important to take and go to the Sinhala Buddhist governed areas and also work with those civilians and trying to identify them, and also helping and giving them a chance to understand the cultural differences and the beauty of culture of the other ethnic groups of the country. And also, when examined how the organizations conduct their post-war peace building mission in the state, it is visible that they are based on the liberal democratic principles on peace building while trying to address the root causes of the conflict to achieve positive peace. And also, in order to reduce the challenge which slowed down the entire post-war peace building process, it is really important to re-establish a peace-loving political culture and government, and also flexible governmental administrative sector, cooperative diaspora community, and also understandable civilians and responsible media sector. And on the other hand, it's really, really important to introduce local module of peace building to the post-war peace building mission in Sri Lanka. So this is the conclusion part of my today presentation. And also you can see the list of my references. And yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. So two interesting presentations so far. We will have much for discussion. The next presenter is DMCJ Bandara Peradeniya Vishwavidyalaya. May presentation ki title එක මම සිංහලෙන් කියවන්නම්. ත්‍රිකුණාමලය දිස්ත්‍රික්කයේ මුල්ලිපොතාන ග්‍රාම සේවා වසමෙහි පශ්චාත් යුද්ධ සමය ජනවාර්ගික ගැටුම් හා සිංහල මුස්ලිම් අන්තර් ජනවාර්ගික සම්බන්ධතා පිළිබඳවයි ප්‍රසන්ටේෂන් එක. මම දැන් ආරාධනා කරනවා බණ්ඩාර පෙරදෙණිය විශ්වවිද්‍යාලයේ ප්‍රසන්ටේෂන් එක ආරම්භ කරන්න කියලා.
කොළඹ විශ්වවිද්‍යාලයේ සමාජ විද්‍යා දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවේ ජාත්‍යන්තර පර්යේෂණ සමුළුව සඳහා මම ඉදිරිපත් කරන පර්යේෂණ පත්‍රිකාවේ පර්යේෂණ මාතෘකාව වෙන්නේ පශ්චාත් යුද සමය ජනමාර්ගික ගැටුම් හා සිංහල මුස්ලිම් අන්තර් ජනමාර්ගික සම්බන්ධතා යන මාතෘකාවයි. ශ්‍රී ලාංකික සමාජය ගත් විට එය විවිධ ජනමාර්ගික කණ්ඩායම් ජීවත් වෙන විවිධ සංස්කෘතික සමූහයන්ගෙන් සමන්විත බහුවිධ සමාජයක් විදිහට හඳුනා ගන්නවා. මන්ද ශ්‍රී ලංකාව තුළ සිංහල, දෙමළ, මුස්ලිම්, බර්ග, මැලේ ආදී විවිධාකාර වූ ජනමාර්ගික කණ්ඩායම් ජීවත් වන නිසා. ඒ වගේම තමයි මෙරට තුළ විවිධ ජනමාර්ගික කණ්ඩායම් අතර විවිධාකාරී අන්තර් සම්බන්ධතා අපිට හඳුනා ගන්න පුළුවන්. සිංහල මුස්ලිම්, සිංහල දෙමළ, දෙමළ මුස්ලිම් මේ ආදී විදිහට විවිධ ජනවර්ග අතර විවිධාකාරී සම්බන්ධතා අපිට දැක ගන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ අතර සිංහල මුස්ලිම් ජනවර්ග අතර පවතින අන්තර් සම්බන්ධතා පිළිබඳ අවධානය යොමු කරනකොට අපිට දැක ගන්න පුළුවන් කාරණාව තමයි මුල් කාලීන ලංකා සමාජයේ සිට අද දක්වාම විවිධ ආකාරයේ සම්බන්ධතා ඉදිරියට ඇවිල්ලා තියෙනවා. ඒ සම්බන්ධතා ආගමික, භාෂාමය, අධ්‍යාපනික, දේශපාලනික මෙන්ම විවාහ සම්බන්ධතා ආදී සම්බන්ධතාව තුළින් අපිට නිරීක්ෂණය කරන්න පුළුවන්. ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ මුලින් පැවති ජාතික සමගි හා සාමය 1915 පැවති සිංහල මුස්ලිම් කල කොලාහලවල ප්‍රතිඵලයක් විදිහට බිඳී කියලා තියෙනවා. එතෙන් සිට අද දක්වාම විවිධ ආකාරයේ සිදුවීම් ඔස්සේ ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ පැවති ජනවර්ග අතර විවිධාකාර ගැටුම් අපිට හඳුනා ගන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ වගේම ඉතිහාසයේ සිදු වූ යම් යම් සිදුවීම් තුළිනුත් සිංහල මුස්ලිම් ජනයා අතර යම්කිසි ගැටුම්කාරී අවස්ථා නිර්මාණය වීම අපිට දැක ගන්න පුළුවන්කම තිබෙනවා. ඒවා ඉතිහාසයේ විවිධාකාර වූ සිදුවීම් ඔස්සේ අපිට නිරීක්ෂණය කරන්න පුළුවන්. කෙසේ නමුත් පැවති යුද සමය තුළ අපිට සිංහල මුස්ලිම් ගැටුම සමාජය තුළ දකින්න ලැබුණේ නැහැ. මන්ද සිංහල දෙමළ ජනමාර්ගික ප්‍රශ්නය නිසා සිංහල මුස්ලිම් ගැටුම් සමාජය තුළ යටපත් වෙලා තිබුණා. නමුත් 2009 යුද්ධයෙන් පසු කාලය තුළ නැවතත් සිංහල මුස්ලිම් ගැටුම සමාජය තුළ ඉස්මතු වෙලා තිබෙනවා. ඒ අනුව අපිට දැක ගන්න ලැබුණා 2009න් පසු කාලය තුළ විවිධාකාර වූ සිදුවීම් රාශියක් තුළින් මේ ගැටුම ඉස්මතු වෙනවා. මෙවැනි තත්ත්වයක් තුළ මෙවැනි පසුබිමක් තුළ ජනමාර්ගික ගැටුම් ජනවර්ග අතර පවතින අන්තර් සම්බන්ධතාවයන් කෙරෙහි කුමන ආකාරයේ බලපාලා තියෙනවාද යන අධ්‍යයනය කිරීම මේ අධ්‍යයනය මගින් සිදු කරනවා. ඒ අනුව මගේ පර්යේෂණ ගැටලුව වෙන්නේ පශ්චාත් යුද සමය තුළ ඇති වූ සිංහල මුස්ලිම් ජනමාර්ගික ගැටුම් ඓතිහාසික වශයෙන් සිංහල මුස්ලිම් අන්තර් ජනවර්ග සම්බන්ධතා පැති ග්‍රාමීය සමාජයන්හි අන්තර් ජනවර්ග සම්බන්ධතාවයන්ට කුමන බලපෑමක් සිදු කර ඇත යන්න අධ්‍යයනය කිරීම. මගේ පර්යේෂණ අරමුණු වෙන්නේ පශ්චාත් යුද සමය තුළ ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ සිංහල මුස්ලිම් අන්තර් ජනවර්ග සම්බන්ධතාවල ස්වභාවය හඳුනා ගැනීම, ඒ වගේම පශ්චාත් යුද සමය තුළ සිංහල මුස්ලිම් අන්තර් ජනවර්ග සම්බන්ධතාවල සිදු ඇති වෙනස්කම් හඳුනා ගැනීම, ඒ වගේම තමයි සිංහල මුස්ලිම් අන්තර් ජනවර්ග සම්බන්ධතාවල වෙනස් වීම සඳහා බලපෑ ඇති හේතු හඳුනා ගැනීම. මගේ අධ්‍යයනයට අදාළ අධ්‍යයන ක්‍රමවේදය කෙරෙහි අවධානය යොමු කරනකොට මගේ පර්යේෂණ සැලසුම විදිහට මම මෙතනදී යොදාගෙන තියෙනවා ගුණාත්මක පර්යේෂණ ක්‍රමවේදය. අධ්‍යයන ශ්‍රේෂ්ඨ ලෙස තෝරාගෙන තිබෙන්නේ ත්‍රිකුණාමල දිස්ත්‍රික්කයේ මොළිපතාන 228B ග්‍රාම සේවා වසම. එතකොට මේ ග්‍රාම සේවා වසම තෝරා ගන්න විශේෂයෙන් හේතු වන්නේ ත්‍රිකුණාමල දිස්ත්‍රික්කය කියන්නේ සිංහල මුස්ලිම් දෙමළ කියන ජනවාර්ගික කණ්ඩායම් තුන ඉතාම සංහිඳියාවෙන් ජීවත් වෙන දීර්ඝ කාලයක් තිස්සේ ඓතිහාසික වශයෙන් මේ ජනවර්ගයන් අතර සම්බන්ධතා පවත්වාගෙන එන ශ්‍රේෂ්ඨයක් වීම නිසා. එතකොට මම මේ අධ්‍යයනයේදී බැලුවේ මේ පශ්චාත් යුද සමයේ සිදුවෙච්ච ජනවාර්ගික ගැටුම් විශේෂයෙන් සිංහල මුස්ලිම් ජනවර්ග අතර ඇතිවෙච්ච ගැටුම්කාරී තත්ත්වයන් මේ වගේ ඓතිහාසික වශයෙන් සම්බන්ධතාවයන් පැවති සමාජයක ඒ වගේම තමයි මෙවැනි ගැටුම් වාර්තා නොවිච්ච ප්‍රදේශයක ජනමාර්ගික සම්බන්ධතාවයන්ට මොන වගේ බලපෑමක් සිදු කර ඇද්ද යන්න පිළිබඳ අධ්‍යයනය කිරීම නිසා මම මේ අධ්‍යයන සඳහා මේ ශාස්ත්‍රය තෝරාගෙන යනවා. මේ තියෙන්නේ මගේ පර්යේෂණ ශාස්ත්‍රයට අදාළ සිතියම. අධ්‍යයන නියදිය පිළිබඳ අවධානය යොමු කිරීමේදී සිංහල පවුල් 15ක් සහ මුස්ලිම් 15ක් ඇතුළත් වෙන පරිදි පවුල් 30ක් සහ දත්තදායකයන් 30 දෙනෙකු ඇතුළත් වෙන පරිදි 33 දෙනෙකුගේ නියදියක් මම මේ සඳහා යොදාගෙන තියෙනවා. එය නියදිය තෝරාගෙන තියෙන්නේ අරමුණු සහගත නියදි ක්‍රමය. දත රැස් කිරීමේ ක්‍රම පිළිබඳව අවධානය කිරීමේදී ප්‍රාථමික සහ ද්විතීයික දත මෙහිදී මම රැස් කරලා තියෙනවා. ප්‍රාථමික දත රැස් කිරීම සඳහා ගැඹුරු සම්මුඛ සාකච්ඡා, ව්‍යුහගත සම්මුඛ සාකච්ඡා, ඒ වගේම ඉලක්කගත සම්මුඛ සාකච්ඡා සහ නිරීක්ෂණ යොදාගෙන තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම ද්විතීයික තොරතුරු විශේෂයෙන් මොළිපතාන ග්‍රාම සේවා වාර්තා සම්පත් පැතිකඩ වගේ දේවල් මෙහිදී මම පාවිච්චි කරලා තියෙනවා. යනුව අධ්‍යයනයේ දත්ත විශ්ලේෂණය තේමාකරණය ඔස්සේ සිදු කරලා මෙහිදී ඉදිරිපත් කරලා තිබෙනවා. අධ්‍යයනයට අදාළ අධ්‍යයන සොයා ගැනීම කෙරෙහි අවධානය යොමු කරනකොට හඳුනා ගැනීමට හැකි මේ සමාජය තුළ මේ අධ්‍යයන ශ්‍රේෂ්ඨය තුළ සිංහල මුස්ලිම් ජනයා අතර සමාජ ආර්ථික සම්බන්ධතා ඉතා දීර්ඝ කාලයක් තිස්සේ පැවැත්වාගෙන එන සංහිඳියාවෙන් ජීවත් වෙන ප්‍රදේශයක් කියන වග. හැබැයි වර්තමානයේ වෙනකොට මේ සම්බන්ධයෙන් මේ දේවල් බොහෝ සෙයින් වෙනස් වීමකට ලක් වෙලා තියෙන බව තමයි අධ්‍යයනයේදී හඳුනා ගැනීමට හැකි. ඒ විදිහට සිංහල මුස්ලිම් සමාජීය සම්බන්ධතාවල මොන වගේ වෙනස්කම්ද සිදු වෙලා තියෙන්නේ කියලා බලනකොට විවිධ මාතෘකා ඔස්සේ මේ පිළිබඳව හඳුනා ගැනීමට හැකි වුණා. විශේෂයෙන්ම අන්තර් පුජ්‍යල සම්බන්ධතාව තුළ සිදු වෙච්ච වෙනස්කම් මෙහිදී ප්‍රධාන වශයෙන් හඳුනා ගැනීමට හැකි වුණා. මේ සම්මුඛ සාකච්ඡාව තුළ මේ බව අවබෝධ කරගන්න පුළුවන්. විශේෂයෙන්ම සිංහල මුස්ලිම් ජනවර්ග අතර අන්තර් පුජ්‍යල සම්බන්ධතා ඉතාම කුළුපග සමාජ සම්බන්ධතා අතීතයේ තිබිලා තියෙනවා. මොකද මේ ප්‍රදේශය සිංහල බෞද්ධ පිරිස් සහ මුස්ලිම් පිරිස් ජීවත් වෙන. එතකොට මේ අය අතර ආගමික වශයෙන් සහයෝගීශීලීත්වයක් තිබිලා තියෙනවා. විශේෂයෙන්ම පන්සලේ විවිධ පින්කම් සඳහා මුස්ලිම් අය සම්බන්ධ වෙලා තියෙන නාට්‍ය පෙන්වීම වගේ දේවල් වලට, ඒ වගේම දන්සල් පැවැත්වීමේදී, පෙරහැර පැවැත්වීමේදී මේ දේවල් වලදී මේ අයගේ දායකත්වය ලැබිලා තියෙනවා. නමුත් අද වෙනකොට මේ සම්බන්ධතා පන්ත්‍රපුච සම්බන්ධතා වෙනස් වීම නිසාවෙන් මේ තත්ත්වයන් මේ දේවල් වලට සහභාගී නොවන ආකාරයක් දෙපිරිසම අතර දැක ගන්නට ලැබෙනවා. මේ සම්මුඛ සාකච්ඡාවල තුලිනුත් අපිට අවබෝධ කරගන්න පුළුවන්. විශේෂයෙන්ම අන්තර්පුජ්‍යල සම්බන්ධතා බොහෝ විට අපිට අද දකින්නට ලැබෙන්නේ වැඩිහිටි සිංහල මුස්ලිම් පිරිමි පාර්ශවයන්ගේ පමණයි. විශේෂයෙන්ම වැඩිහිටි සිංහල මුස්ලිම් පිරිමි පාර්ශවයන් පමණ සමහර ඒවා සීමා වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම සමවයස් කණ්ඩායම් අතර සම්බන්ධතාවයන් අවමයි. ඒ වගේම තමයි සිංහල මුස්ලිම් තරුණ කොටස් අතර සම්බන්ධතා ඉතාම දුර්වල මට්ටමක පවතින තමයි හඳුනා ගැනීමට හැකි වුණේ. ඒ වගේම තමයි මේ සම්බන්ධතා දුරස් වීමේලා පාස්කු ඉරදින පෙරහැරේ හා ඉන් පස්සේ ඇතිවෙච්ච තත්ත්වයන් ඉතාම තීරණාත්මක ලෙස බලපා තියෙනවා. මොකද මේ සම්බන්ධතාවයන්ගේ දුරස් වීම සඳහා දුරස් වෙන්න ඉතාම දැඩි ලෙස දුරස් වෙන්න මේ තත්ත්වය බලපාලා තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම තමයි සිංහල ජනයා මුස්ලිම් ජනයා සමග පවතින සම්බන්ධතා දුරස් කර තියෙන ආකාරයක් අපිට හඳුනා ගන්න හැකියාව ලැබිලා තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම තමයි මුස්ලිම් ජනයා සම්බන්ධතා ඒ ආකාරයෙන්ම පවත්වාගෙන යන යම් කිසි උත්සාහයක දරුවත් සිංහල ජනයා වගේ ඉවත් වෙන්න උත්සාහ කරලා තියෙන ආකාරය තමයි දකින්න පුළුවන්කම ලැබෙන්නේ. ඒ වගේම තමයි සිංහල මුස්ලිම් ජනවර්ග අතර සම්බන්ධතා දුරස් වෙලා තිබුණත් යම් කිසි ආකාරයක ජනවර්ගයේ තුල සම්බන්ධතා වර්ධනය වෙලා තියෙනවා. විශේෂයෙන්ම ජනවර්ගයේ පිළිබඳ හැඟීම් වගේ දේවල් ඉස්මතු වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඒ අනුව ජනවර්ග ඇතුළත සම්බන්ධතාවල යම්කිසි ආකාරයක වර්ධනය වීමක් දක ගන්නට ලැබුණා. ජනවර්ග අතර තිබෙන සම්බන්ධතා යම්කිසි ආකාරයක පළදු වීම වලට ලක් වෙලා. ඒ වගේම තමයි සාම්ප්‍රදායික සිරිත් පිරිත් වල සිදු වෙලා තියෙන වෙනස්කම්, විශේෂයෙන්ම අවුරුදු සැමරීම් වගේ දේවල් වලදී සිංහල මුස්ලිම් ජනතාව ආහාර වර්ග, විශේෂයෙන්ම සිංහල අලුත් අවුරුද්දේ කෑම බෙදා හදා ගැනීම, ඒ වගේම රාමසාම් වගේ දේවල් වලදී, හජ් වගේ දේවල් වලදී ආහාර බෙදා ගැනීම, කෑම පාසල් බෙදා ගැනීම සිදු වෙලා තියෙනවා. නමුත් අද වෙනකොට මේ දේවල් සිද්ධ වෙන්නේ නැහැ. බොහොම අඩුවෙන් තමයි සිද්ධ වෙන්නේ. ඒ වගේම තමයි විවාහ සම්බන්ධතා සහ විවාහ උත්සව වගේ දේවල් වලට සහභාගී වීම සිංහල මුස්ලිම් දෙකකින් තොරව සිද්ධ වෙලා තිබුණත් අද වෙනකොට මේ දේවල් ඒ ජනවර්ග වලට පමණ සීමා වෙලා තියෙන ආකාරයක් ගොඩාක් වෙලාවට දකින්න පුළුවන්. නමුත් යම් යම් සහභාගී වීම දකින්නට ලැබෙනවා. නමුත් අඩු වෙලා තියෙන ආකාරය තමයි දකින්න පුළුවන් වෙලා තියෙන්නේ. ඒ වගේම තමයි උත්සව වලට සහභාගී නොවීම සහ උත්සව මගහැරීම කියන එක විශේෂයෙන්ම ආගමික උත්සව, මංගල, අවමංගල උත්සව සහ අනිකුත් සංස්කෘතික උත්සව වලට ජනතාව සහභාගී වීම පිළිබඳ කලින් තිබුණු තත්ත්වයන් අද වෙනකොට වෙනස් වෙලා තියෙනවා. බොහෝ විට ඒවට සහභාගී නොවීම සහ මගහැරීමක් සිද්ධ වෙලා තියෙනවා. විශේෂයෙන්ම ජනමාර්ගයට පමණක් ඒවා ගොඩාක් වෙලාවට අද වෙනකොට සීමා වෙලා. ඒ වගේම තමයි වෛද්‍ය රෝගී සම්බන්ධතාවල යම් වෙනස්කම් සිද්ධ වෙලා තියෙනවා. විශේෂයෙන්ම වෛද්‍යවරු තෝරා ගැනීමේදී මීට පෙර සිංහල මුස්ලිම් ජනමාර්ගිකත්වය පිළිබඳ අවධානයක් යොමු නොකලත් වර්තමාන වෙනකොට ඒවා කෙරෙහි මිනිසුන් සැලකිලිමත් වීමක් පටන් ගන්න තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම අධ්‍යාපන ආයතනවල යම් කිසි වෙනස්කම් සිද්ධ වෙලා තියෙනවා. විශේෂයෙන් මේ ප්‍රදේශයේ තියෙනවා පෙර පාසලක්, ඒක සිංහල මුස්ලිම් දෙගොල්ලම මේ දරුවෝ සහභාගී වෙන පෙර පාසලක්. නමුත් පාස්කු පෙරහැරෙන් පස්සේ ඒ පෙර පාසලට සිංහල දරුවන් ඇතුළත් කිරීම සිද්ධ වෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඒ අනුව වර්තමානයේ වෙනකොට මේ පෙර පාසල සම්පූර්ණයෙන්ම මුස්ලිම් දරුවන්ට පමණක් සීමා වෙලා තියෙනවා. එතකොට එකකින් සිංහල දරුවෝ වෙනම සිංහල පෙර පාසලකට තමයි ඇතුළත් වීම සිද්ධ වෙලා තියෙන නිසා යම් යම් ආකාරයක අධ්‍යාපන ආයතනවල වෙනස්කම් සිද්ධ වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම සංස්කෘතික අංගවලට දක්වන ප්‍රතිචාරවල වෙනස්කම්, විශේෂයෙන්ම ඇඳුම් පැළඳුම්, ආගමික ස්ථාන ආදී දේවල් වල කලින් නොතිබෙන ආකාරයේ මිනිසුන් තුළ ප්‍රතිචාරයක් මතුවෙමින් පවතින බව උන්ගේ ආකල්ප සහ අදහස් විමසීමේදී හඳුනා ගැනීමට හැකි වුණා. මේ විදිහට සමාජීය සම්බන්ධතාවල බොහෝ වෙනස්කම් අපිට නිරීක්ෂණය කරන්න පුළුවන් වගේම ප්‍රදේශීය ආර්ථික සම්බන්ධතාවන් සිංහල මුස්ලිම් ආර්ථික සම්බන්ධතාවල වෙනස්කම් නිර්මාණය වෙලා තියෙන බව පෙනී යන විශේෂයෙන්ම වෙළඳ ව්‍යාපාර වර්ජනය කිරීම, හලාල් විරෝධී ආකල්ප ජනතාව තුළ වර්ධනය වීම, කුෂ්කාර්මික පිනල් ලබා දීමේදී ජනමාධිකත්වය වැනි දේවල් සැලකිලිමත් වීම, රැකියා අවස්ථාවන් කෙරෙහි යම්කිසි ආකාරයකට බලපෑම් කිරීම ආදී දේවලුත් මේ ප්‍රදේශය තුළින් වාර්තා වෙන විශේෂයෙන්ම අතීතයේදී ඔවුන් එවැනි දේවල් පිළිබඳ අවධානයක් යොමු නොකළත් වර්තමානයේ වෙන විට ඔවුන්ගේ ආකල්ප තුළ ජනවාරිකත්වයේ ඉස්මතු වීම කියන එක දකින්න පුළුවන්කම ලැබිලා තියෙනවා. මේ නිසා සිංහල මුස්ලිම් සමාජ සම්බන්ධතාව වගේම ආර්ථික සම්බන්ධතා වර්තමානයේ වෙනකොට වෙනස්කම් වලට ලක් වී ඇති බව තමයි අධ්‍යයනයකින් හඳුනාගන්න හැකි වුණේ. ඒ වගේම තමයි මේ අන්තර් ජනවාර්ගික සම්බන්ධතා දුරස් වීම කෙරෙහි බලපෑ ඇති සාධක පිළිබඳ අවධානය යොමු කිරීමේදී මේ අධ්‍යයනයේදී හඳුනා ගැනීමට හැකි වුණා මේ කෙරෙහි බලපාලා තියෙන විවිධ සාධක බලපාලා තියෙන බව. විශේෂයෙන්ම සමාජ ආකල්ප සහ ඒකාකෘතීන් විශේෂයෙන්ම සිංහල මුස්ලිම් ජනවාර්ග පිළිබඳ නිර්මාණය වෙලා තියෙන සමාජ ඒකාකෘතීන් විශේෂයෙන්ම මුස්ලිම් ජනතාව කෙරෙහි නිර්මාණය වෙලා තියෙන ඒකාකෘතීන් වගේ දේවල් මේකට බලපාලා තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම දේශපාලන පක්ෂ ආකන්නෑම් වල ක්‍රියාකලාපයන්, අන්තවාදී සංවිධාන වල ක්‍රියාකාරකම්, සංස්කෘතියන් අතර පවතින අනවබෝධය සහ සංස්කෘතියන් නොවිවසීම, ඒ වගේම ආර්ථික තරංගය, මිනිසුන්ගේ කාර්ය බහුලත්වය නිසා ඔවුන් එකට එකතු වීමට තියෙන අපහසුතා, සමාජ මාධ්‍යයන්ගේ බලපෑම විශේෂයෙන්ම වෛරී ප්‍රකාශ ඇතුළත් වෙන ආකාරයේ ප්‍රකාශ වගේ දේවල් ආදී තුලින් මේ තත්ත්වය අපිට දැක ගැනීමට හැකියාව ලැබෙනවා. විශේෂයෙන් මෙවැනි ලක්ෂණ මෙවැනි සාධක මත ජනවාර්ග සම්බන්ධතා යම්කිසි ආකාරයක දුරස් වීම සඳහා මෙවැනි කරුණු බලපාලා තියෙන විශේෂයෙන්ම මේ අධ්‍යයනය 2020-21 කාලය තුල තමයි සිදු කරනු ලැබුවේ. එතකොට ඒ කාලය තුලදී මෙවැනි තත්ත්වයක් අපිට දැක ගන්න ලැබුණා. එවැනිම අධ්‍යයනයේ නිගමන කෙරෙහි අවධානය යොමු කරනකොට පෙනී යනවා අන්තර් ජනවාර්ග සම්බන්ධතාවල වෙනස් වීමෙහිලා පාස්කීර දින ප්‍රහාරය සහ ඊට පස්සේ ඇති තත්ත්වයන් තම තීරණාත්මක ලෙස මේකෙදි බලපාලා තියෙනවා. සම්බන්ධතාව වෙනස් වීම කෙරෙහි ඒ වගේම තමයි හඳුනාගන්න විශේෂ දේ තමයි සිංහල ජනතාව විසින් මුස්ලිම් ජනයා සමග පවතින සම්බන්ධතාවය යම් කිසි මට්ටමකට හකුලා ගන්න උත්සාහ කරන නමුත් මුස්ලිම් ජනතාවම සම්බන්ධ එක ආකාරයෙන්ම පවත්වාගෙන යාමට යම් කිසි උත්සාහයක් දරන ආකාරයක් නිරීක්ෂණය වෙනවා. මොකද ආර්ථික මේ වශයෙන් කටයුතු කරනකොට මුස්ලිම් ජනතාව වැඩි කාර්යභාරයක් ප්‍රදේශය තුළ සිදු කරනවා. එතකොට ඔවුන්ට සිංහල අයත් එක්ක වැඩ කරන්න සිද්ධ වෙනවා. ඔවුන් ගෙන්නා ගැනීම තම වෙළඳ ව්‍යාපාර සඳහා. එතකොට ගොඩක් වෙලාවට ඔවුන් සම්බන්ධතා ඉදිරියට පවත්වාගෙන යන කටයුතු කළත් සිංහල ජනතාව යම්කිසි ආකාරයකින් ඒ වගේ ඉවත් වෙන ආකාරය තමයි පෙනී යන්නේ. ඒ වගේම තමයි තරුණ කොටස් අතර ජනවාර්ගික සම්බන්ධතාවය ශක්තිමත් ආකාරයෙන් ක්‍රියාත්මක වීමක් සිද්ධ වෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඒ වගේම තමයි තරුණ කොටස් විසින් වැඩිහිටි ප්‍රජාවට ජනවාර්ගික සම්බන්ධතාවලින් ඉවත් වීමට බලපෑම් සිදු කරන ආකාරයක් හඳුනා ගැනීමට හැකි වෙනවා විශේෂම සිංහල තරුණ කොටස් තුළින්. ඒ වගේම තමයි ජනවාර්ගික සම්බන්ධතාවයන් කෙරෙහි ඍණාත්මක බලපෑම් සිදු කිරීමේලා සමාජ මාධ්‍ය අතිශය බලපෑම් සහගත වෙලා තියෙනවා විශේෂම තරුණ ප්‍රජාවේ අදහස් නිර්මාණයෙහිලා මේ தත්ත්වය වැඩි බලපෑමක් කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම තමයි අන්තර් ජනවාර්ගික සම්බන්ධතාවල වෙනස්කම් සිදු වී ඇති බව හඳුනා ගැනීමට හැකි වුණා. ජනවාර්ගයේ ඇතුළත සම්බන්ධතා යම්කිසි ආකාරයකට වර්ධනය වීමකුත් දකින්න. මේ අනුව අපිට පෙනී යන කාරණාව තමයි මේ අධ්‍යයනය තුළින් ඓතිහාසික වශයෙන් සිංහල මුස්ලිම් ජනතාව සමාජීය හා ආර්ථික වශයෙන් පවත්වාගෙන යන ජනවාර්ගික අන්තර් සම්බන්ධතාවයන් වෙනස්කම් වලට ලක් වෙලා තියෙන බව. ඒ වගේම තමයි මේ අන්තර් ජනවාර්ගික සම්බන්ධතාවල වෙනස්කම් සඳහා සිංහල හා මුස්ලිම් ජනයා අතර ඇති වූ ජනවාර්ගික ගැටුම් එහා සම්බන්ධ අවශේෂ වූ හේතු කාරණා රාශියක් බලපාලා තියෙන ආකාරයක් මේකදී හඳුනා ගැනීමට හැකියාව ලැබුණා. ඒ අනුව මේකදී මේ අධ්‍යයනය තුළින් එන නිගමනය වුණේ මේ ප්‍රදේශයේදී සිදු කරපු මේ ප්‍රදේශය හා සම්බන්ධ සිදු අධ්‍යයනයේදී සිංහල මුස්ලිම් ජනවාර්ගික ගැටුම් හේතුවෙන් එම ගැටුම් ඇති වූ ප්‍රදේශවල වගේම එවැනි සිද්ධීන් වාර්තා නොවූ ඓතිහාසික වශයෙන් සිංහල මුස්ලිම් අන්තර් ජනවාර්ගික සම්බන්ධතා පැවති ග්‍රාමීය සමාජයන් වල පවා සිංහල මුස්ලිම් අන්තර් ජනවාර්ගික සම්බන්ධතා වෙනස් වී ඇති බව තමයි මේ අධ්‍යයනය මගින් හඳුනා ගැනීමට හැකි වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම ඒ අනුව අපිට පේනවා සිංහල මුස්ලිම් අන්තර් ජනවාර්ගික සම්බන්ධතා පැවතිච්ච ප්‍රදේශවල සිංහල මුස්ලිම් අන්තර් ජනවාර්ගික සම්බන්ධතාවල වෙනස්කම් සිදුවා මෙන්ම එවැනි සිදුවීම් වාර්තා නොවිච්ච ඓතිහාසික වශයෙන් අන්තර් සම්බන්ධතා පැවති ග්‍රාමීය සමාජයන් වල පවා මේ ජනවාර්ගික අන්තර් ජනවාර්ගික සම්බන්ධතාවල වෙනස්කම් ඇති වී තිබෙන බව තමයි මේ අනුව හඳුනා ගැනීමට හැකියාව ලැබෙන්නේ. මේ මගේ ආශ්‍රිත ග්‍රන්ථ නාමාවලිය අධ්‍යයනය සඳහා භාවිත කරපු. Thank you.
බොහොම ස්තුතියි. තව ඉතාමත්ම රසවත් ඉදිරිපත් කිරීමක්. මීළඟට තව එක ඉදිරිපත් කිරීමක් තියෙනවා. ඊට පස්සේ අපිට සාකච්ඡාවකට යන්න පුළුවන්. The next presentation is by H.S. Samara Divakara of the University of Jaffna, and the title of the presentation is Legislation to Protect Intangible Cultural Heritage in Libraries, a promise to the present and a legacy for the future.
And a legacy to future.
You can start now. Thank you.
So what do you mean by cultural heritage? So cultural heritage is conceived as a part of the common heritage of mankind, and it includes both tangible cultural heritage and intangible cultural heritage. According to United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals, calls on government to strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural heritage, as well as to ensure public access to information and protect fundamental freedoms in accordance with national legislations and international agreements. So the only convention for the protection and preservation of intangible cultural heritage is the Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage. Before enactment of this convention, there was no any convention which was aimed for the protection, safeguarding and preservation of intangible cultural heritage. So considering the importance of the intangible cultural heritage as a mainstream of cultural diversity and a guarantee of sustainable development, and considering that the international community should contribute together with the state parties to this convention to the safeguard of heritage in a spirit of cooperation and mutual assistance, the convention was adopted on 17th October 2003. So the very purpose of the convention is to safeguard the intangible cultural heritage mainly. Apart from that, the purposes of the convention also include to ensure respect for the intangible cultural heritage of the communities, groups and individuals concerned, to raise awareness at the local, national and international level of the importance of the intangible cultural heritage, and of ensuring mutual appreciation, and to provide for international cooperation and assistance. So Article 1 of the aforesaid convention defines intangible cultural heritage. As per the definition, it includes the practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, skills, as well as the instruments, objects, artifacts, and cultural spaces associated therewith that communities, groups, and in some cases, individuals recognize as part of their cultural heritage. As per the Article 1 of the Convention, it also states the intangible cultural heritage transmitted from generation to generation is constantly recreated by communities and groups in response to their environment, their interaction with the nature and their history, and provides them with a sense of identity and continuity, thus promoting respect for cultural diversity and human creativity. As per the article of the convention, the intangible cultural heritage are of 5 domains. Those domains include oral traditions and expressions, including language as a vehicle of the intangible cultural heritage, performing arts, social practices, rituals and festive events, knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe, and finally, traditional craftsmanship. So the objective of this research article is to shed light on an area of safeguarding and documentation of intangible cultural heritage, at the same time to emphasize on the need of an omnibus legislation which is aimed for the protection and preservation of intangible cultural heritage specifically in libraries. The significance of the study include the first step in safeguarding the intangible cultural heritage in a pluralistic developing country is to identify the expressions and manifestations that can be considered as intangible cultural heritage and making a record or inventory of them. Understanding of the intangible cultural heritage of different ethnic groups helps in intercultural dialogue and encourages mutual respect for other ways of life. When we consider about the libraries play a vital role in preserving tangible items of different cultures of the country as well as the world. At the same time, the libraries have an obligation to preserve the intangible cultural heritage. These might include objects, practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, or skills. Whatever shape they take, these things form part of an intangible cultural heritage which requires much needed attention in order to safeguard them over the generations. So the research methodology adopted in this article is the qualitative methodology, whereas a doctrinal research is carried out, and the primary sources include the legislations and the conventions. For the legislations, mainly Intellectual Property Act number 36 of 23 of Sri Lanka, and for the comparison purpose, National Cultural Heritage Act of 2009 of Philippines are considered, and the Convention for Safeguarding the Intangible Cultural Heritage has been taken into consideration. The secondary sources include scholarly articles, journals, books, and magazines. The research findings includes, as per the Article 11 of the Convention for Safeguarding for the Intangible Cultural Heritage, deals with the role of the state parties, and the same article enshrines that the state parties' obligation is to take the necessary measures to ensure the safeguarding of the intangible cultural heritage present in its territory. And among the safeguarding measures, it also includes identifying and defining the various elements of the intangible cultural heritage present in its territory with the participation of communities, groups, and relevant non-governmental organizations. So, as per the Article 11 of the Convention, it's a question whether Sri Lanka is ensuring such obligation which was undertaken as per the Article 11 of the Convention for Safeguarding for the Intangible Cultural Heritage. It's true that the legislative framework of protecting intangible cultural heritage includes several legislations such as Intellectual Property Act, National Archives Act Law, Tower Hall Theatre Foundation Act, and Arts Council of Ceylon Act, and furthermore. But there's no specific legislation that deals with the protection and preservation as well as the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage. The Intangible Cultural Heritage Inventory compilation began in 2008 by the National Library and Documentation Board under the support of UNESCO, and the inventory is categorized into three main parts: traditions, rituals, and rites of passage. So when we take the National Cultural Heritage Act of 2009 of Philippines, it provides a specific provisions relating to intangible cultural heritage such as practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, and skills. So the author have come to the conclusion that notwithstanding the fact that there are several legislative framework which governs the intangible cultural heritage, they are not definite and exhaustive legislative framework in order to honor the obligations that was undertaken as per the Convention of Safeguarding Intangible Cultural Heritage. So the author finally concludes that there is a dire necessity of enacting a separate omnibus legislation for protection and preservation of the cultural heritage, especially the intangible cultural heritage, while adopting the best practices in Philippines and in compliance with international standards. Thank you.
Okay, so those are the 4 presentations. Thank you very much to all the presenters. Now we can open up for questions. One thing that I have to tell you is that the last 2 presentations were recordings. So for our discussion here, we only have the first 2 presenters. So the questions we can direct to the first 2 presenters alone, unfortunately. Okay, so now as you can see, there's already one question that has appeared in the chat from Unnati Samaravira, who is a member of the department. So Unnati's question is to our second speaker, Ms. Abhay Singha. So I'll read it out. Thanks much for all wonderful presentations. 2 questions for the second speaker. First question, the Tamil diasporic community is not a monolithic and homogeneous group. Have you considered the heterogeneity of the Tamil diasporic community? That's the first question. Second question is, you mentioned that without prioritizing Tamils and Muslims, Sinhalese needs should also be prioritized. Isn't that conclusion still centered within a single majoritarian perspective? Could you please clarify? Thank you. So if you can address those questions, Ms. Abhay Singha, we'll start off.
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much, Ms. Unnati, for the 2 questions. Let me talk about the first question first. It's not a matter. You consider. Yeah, actually, yes. In case of the Tamil diasporic communities, I also considered about that fact. And also in my research, I mainly targeted the conflict affected areas and those organizations. And in case of the diasporic community, I also I was trying to contact the members of the diaspora, but I was not able to do it with the problems with the COVID and the communication related issues. Yes, I also, as you questioned, I considered about the heterogeneity of the Tamil diasporic community, as they are not currently based on the motherland, and also they are staying in the overseas, and also but also engaging in the process of the same country. Yes, but in case of my research, actually, I mainly target the organizations and their contributions. I didn't go I didn't select in case of my data collection and researches, I didn't, collect data from the civilians. I was engaged in mainly targeting the organization perspective. That's why I didn't highlighted about the diaspora, but yeah, that's it. And in case of the second question, without prioritizing mention, it should also be prioritizing that. Please clarify that. No, actually, also thank you very much for the second question. No, actually, the reason for that assumption was, in my data analysis, I mentioned that many of the organizations are actually based on and also prioritizing the Ampara district, which was a multicultural state and multicultural district, and also the second mainly targeted district were actually Tamil majority areas. That's why I highlighted that. I also in the beginning highlighted you that what are the conflict direct affected areas, not direct affected areas. In case of Sri Lanka, we know that the country is totally having the multicultural background, and also we know there are many majority Sinhala governed areas and also Tamil governed areas. In that perspective, I mentioned that in case of the district level and the total population distribution of those districts, I highlighted that it's really important to consider and work on all that governed areas. I didn't mention it on my, like, not in case of the bias, I highlighted the actually population structure of those districts and I made that statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Since we are on the subject of the second paper, I also have some questions, so I will ask them now, or maybe a follow-up to Unnati's comment and questions. The first is, there has been some recent research on diaspora contributions to development. So that might be something that you can look at in order to have a sort of a more substantive understanding of what we so easily reference as diaspora, right? Because I mean, while you explained your position with regards to diaspora, it still doesn't answer the question. And if you are using terms like diaspora, it would be better if you are a little bit more informed as to, or if you give a definition as to what you mean and why you reference diasporas, right? So that's one. The second one, with regards to the districts and the choice, I think it would also be good if you can analyze why certain choices were made by the agencies, because they have certain criteria through which they make choices regarding an area of birth. If you present an analysis based on their justification, I think that would sort of bolster maybe your suggestion with regards to the emphasis of these organizations. Again, it's not clear to me what difference it makes that you identify the fact that they are Tamil majority population areas. There might also be concerns with regards to poverty in certain districts, because some of the war affected areas are more poverty stricken than others. Then also the districts that have large upcountry Tamil populations are also may be targeted for those reasons. So it would be good if you can look at why certain organizations choose the areas that they choose to work in. That would support your paper and your argument more. Okay, thank you very much. So any other questions that the audience has? I have a question for our first speaker. Before I ask that, I'd like to open it up to the audience to ask any questions from the speakers. Okay, so if there are no questions, or until you formulate your questions, I would like to ask one from Ms. Angela Kishore. Thank you for your interesting presentation. I was just wondering now, while I understand that the protest seems very significant, to what extent do you think the protest will have an impact on sort of the electoral presence of the ruling party right now?
Thank you for the question, ma'am. Ma'am,
So,
people generally, yes.
Hello?
Hello, yes, ma'am, are you audible?
Yeah, would you like to respond, or do you want me to clarify the question?
No, ma'am, I got your question. Ma'am,
Okay.
if we look at the scenario, how the present government is taking up the role of an authoritarian government, people will going to respond in their electoral dictate. Like, ma'am, or if we see the BJP government, the present regime, since 2014, ma'am, they try to they are pushing citizens of this country towards a particular religious side. They are trying to impose the ideology of Hindutva doctrine. They are excluding other minorities. This will going to impact their electoral dictates. Like in 2019, we can see that surely they got the less vote compared to the 2014 result. If you compare the 2014 result, they were in the majority of their own party votes. They didn't need any kind of coalition government, but in 2019 they were in the need. So, ma'am, things are changing, and this all these protests and all the government's measure, how they are tilted towards the privatization. They are more towards the Hindu doctrine ideology. So these are the things they have to answer in the next 2024 election. This will going to impact their electoral mandate.
Okay, so that's very hopeful. My next question is about, can you say a little bit about the gendered nature or the sort of the gender breakdown of the protest movements?
Ma'am, if we look at the this Anti-Citizenship Amendment Act and the farmers' protest, we have seen a lot of women coming out of their household and protesting for the same. Like we have seen the male population protesting for the same. So, ma'am, we can say that women are equally conscious about their rights, about being the part of the part of the collective framework that in the present that is generating. Like, ma'am, farming or the agriculture is not only about the male domination. Women equally support that occupation. Similarly, ma'am, when we see the Citizenship Amendment Act, ma'am, we can citizenship is not only about the male population. It equally impacts the women also. So, ma'am, therefore, women, what they are protesting, and these were the protests where we have seen the women are more conscious about these changing dilemmas the government is coming with. They're trying to impose to their citizens.
Okay, thank you. My suggestion was actually that it was, or at least from what I have read, my understanding was that the presence of women is overwhelming. I mean, I feel like there's a sort of a many of the Shaheen Bagh, for instance,
Yes, ma'am.
where the
Yes,
presence
ma'am.
of women was huge, and you know,
Huge, ma'am.
but it's really heartening to hear about that, and I really hope with you that there will be some electoral change come 2024.
We hope.
Okay, so yeah, thank you so much. Very interesting
Ma'am.
presentation from all four presenters. I'll still wait one more minute for any other questions to the speakers. So, and I'm really sorry that we can't ask questions of the third and fourth speaker, whose presentations were also extremely interesting and give us a lot of things to think about. Okay, so it doesn't seem like there are any other questions. So if that is the case, then I'll bring the session to a close. Thank you so much for your participation. Very, very interesting presentations. I hope that you will be able to publish this work in a format that we can all access. And you are also welcome to publish with us. We have, yeah, but that is only for the Sinhala language media. But the University of Colombo has a journal that you can also consider publishing in. Okay, thank you very much. And I will now close the session.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Professor Farzana Hanifa, for chairing the session today. We hope that all of you had a very insightful session. Thank you all.